Hello, what's up YouTubers? Thank you so much again for tuning into my channel. My name is Cordell Coles, aka the Fashion Connoisseur. I refer to you guys as the fashion connoisseurs also because in some shape or form, I feel like we all have a taste of fashion and some form of creativity that we like to express to the world. So I look at it as an art form, human art form that we all possess. So in this video, I'm pretty much going to go over the measurements for when we drafted our t-shirts from the previous video. And I'm also going to show you how to add your seam allowance as well as labeling your patterns for each pattern piece. And then in the next video, I'm going to show you how to draft your sleeve pattern. The sleeve pattern drafting can be a little bit tricky, but I'll go over it with you and try to simplify it for you as much as I can. I know these videos can be very extensive. I'll try to make them as short as possible. And please, just bear with me. The thing about this industry, you have to have a lot of patience. So I'm going to try to simplify these steps for you guys as easy as possible. So please, bear with me. So like I said, I'm going to show you how to go over your measurements that we did for your sleeve draft. Excuse me, for your t-shirt draft. So here we go. So this was the t-shirt I was using from the last video where we took our measurements for simply from using what we already have, because that's what this channel is about, using what you already have to create your own styles. So we took this t-shirt, we took the measurements from this t-shirt. So I'm going to show you which measurements we took and how we came up with our draft from there. So first measurement we took was with our measuring tape, we took our center front measurement. So the very top of the t-shirt, the center of the t-shirt right here at the center neck. We took our measurement from here and we went all the way down to the hem. And we got, for that measurement, we got 23 and 9/16. So as you measuring your t-shirt, you want to make note of the sizes or the measurements on the side of the draft. So we got our center front length, which is 23 and 9/16. So you want to make note of that on the side because you're going to need these measurements later on when you're drafting your pattern. And also for your sleeve, you're going to need these measurements for when you're drafting your sleeve. 23 and 9/16 is what I got. Everybody's t-shirts measurement are going to be different because depending on how long you had the t-shirt or how often you wear it, the t-shirt kind of stretches, it also shrinks. So your measurements can come out completely different. So my measurements will not be the same as yours. So whatever shape or form your t-shirt is in, those are the measurements you will get. So don't be surprised or think that it's something wrong with the shirt. That's pretty much exactly how the t-shirt is going to look. So that's your center front. So we want to make note of that. Center front length. And now we want to measure our center back length. So for our center back, we pretty much do the same thing when we measure, but we're going to measure from the very back of the t-shirt, from at the top here, instead of from the top here at the neck. This is just the front of the neck. This is the front of your body. The back is from the back. So you measure from the back all the way down to the hem. Just a few things you have to really pay attention to when you're considering making a pattern. You got to ask yourself certain questions that I remember my professor always would ask me. As a human being, is our shoulder bone bigger? Our shoulder bigger in the back, or is it bigger in the front? So just some things you want to question or ask yourself. Your back is always going to be bigger than the front. So my center back length will actually be larger than my center front length. So for my center back length, I got 26 and 3/8. The center front was 23 and 9/16. So the center back would be 26 and 3/8. So make note of that on the side. So we got our center back length. Next, we're going to measure our center back neckline length. So that will be from here, the shoulder tip, to the center back line. So it should be like a line here for the center back. So I got, just take my measuring tape and just go around. I got 3 and I have 3 5/8. And it's a lot easier if you're using a light colored shirt because you actually can see the material. Like you can see the seams a lot better as you're going through. So I have my back neck line would be 3 5/8. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the front neckline. So I'll measure from the shoulder tip all the way to the front curve of the shirt. So I have, let me see, 5 1/2. Okay, so I have from here, I'll go all the way around, and I have 5 1/2 for my front neckline. So the front neckline is actually a lot bigger than the back because the front you have more of a curve at the neck. The back you only have the curve from the back of the neck to the shoulder. You don't go all the way around. The front neckline is always going to be bigger than the back neckline. So next we want to measure our shoulder length. So pretty much from the shoulder tip to the neck tip. So we'll go from here to here, and I have 1/8, 3/8, and 5/8. I have 5 5/8 for my shoulder length. And 5/8. So we got that, and then we want to measure our sleeve length simply from the shoulder tip to the sleeve hem. And we get 7 1/4. So then we'll measure our sleeve width, the opening of our sleeve, from here to here. So then we get an even 7 inches. And then we want to measure from our armhole length. So pretty much we're going to measure from how wide this armhole is from here, the shoulder tip, all the way around the shoulder tip, all the way around to the under arm of the shoulder or the sleeve. So we get from here, we want to just take our measuring tape and just go around slowly, keep the shirt flat against the floor or the table. So we get 9 1/2. So our armhole length is 9 1/2. And last but not least, we measure our hem, which is the bottom of the shirt. And we're only doing 1/2. So when we measured our hem in the previous video, we got 10 inches. So we measured from here all the way to the center front. We didn't measure all the way across. We only took half of that. Or we could just measure the whole length of the shirt and we got 20, and we take half of that, which is 10. So that's our hem, that's the width of our hem, 10 inches. Shirt hem, 10 inches. Okay, so here's our measurements for our shirt. And you always want to keep track of all your measurements. Oh, one more measurement. We want to get the side seam length. Starting from under the arm, we want to get our side seam length starting from under the arm here all the way down to the bottom of the shirt. So on that we got, make sure the t-shirt is flat, right under the arm, go all the way down, and we got 15 1/2. So sleeve side seam length. $15.5. Okay, so we have all our measurements, and as you're going through and you're drafting it, I would suggest maybe either mark your measurements on the side of the paper of the draft, or you can actually mark your measurements with the indications of length on your draft. So what I mean by that is, I don't know if you can see this clear enough, but you're going to mark your measurements in with the draft as you're going through. So like I mentioned before, your shoulder length, you got 5 and 5/8. The back, the armhole length, we got 9.5 here. The sleeve length, we got 7 1/4 here. So you want to make a draft, make a note of all those measurements as you're drafting the pattern. In these sections here, I also want to mention these little red sections here. This is your ribbing. This little section here is your ribbing. Whatever t-shirt you find, and it doesn't have this on here, you can just include that with the measurement. So from your shoulder tip all the way to your neck tip, that can be one measurement. But if you like, you can measure from your shoulder tip to here, to the ribbing, where the ribbing starts, if your t-shirt has a ribbing. So ribbing, we can actually make that a separate pattern. So that's optional, but we can make that a separate pattern, or we can also include it as one whole pattern. So that's the red. The red stands for the ribbing. And also would suggest that you use different color markers for different pattern pieces. So the red is your ribbing. The blue here is your back pattern, because your blue neckline is starting right here. This is your blue neckline right here. This is the ribbing here at the top, but this line right here is your back neckline, and then this is your front. The green is your front. This is your front neckline. So I use that to highlight the different pattern pieces. So there you have it. This is your draft for all your measurements included. And also I went ahead and cut the pattern pieces out for you. And here is your draft with your different pieces. Here is your front pattern in green. This is your front pattern in green. Always keep different color markers for different pattern pieces. And here's your back pattern in blue. And also you want to label your pattern pieces. You want to label what it is. You want to label the cut. You want to label the cut. You want to label what pattern piece it is. So it's your t-shirt, the back. And you also want to label the size for that shirt. And this one is the small. And this here is called your grain line. You want to make a center line down each pattern pieces. So when you get ready to cut it, it lines up with the grain of the fabric. You want to line it up with the lengthwise grain of your material. And I'll go over that later in the next video. So this is your blue pattern piece, and the green is your front pattern piece. You want to label all your information. You want to label how to cut it. This is cut on the fold, where you see these arrows, and then you see this line here, and it cuts back in. That means to cut this pattern piece on the fold. So I'll put all that in the description, what the patterns, what the labeling means, and the cut, and how to label your patterns. This is the piece, which piece it is. It's the front. And you also want to put the size of the piece on there, so it's a small. And then from there, I also added the ribbing, like I said, as a separate pattern piece. You can add that as a separate pattern piece if you like, if your t-shirt has a ribbing. So you want to put that information on there as well, how to cut it. Sorry, I don't know if you can see this too well. So this is your ribbing piece for the hem. And then you're going to have a ribbing piece for the necklines. And you want to label those pieces as well. I'll try to make this more visible for you guys. This stuff is very hands-on. It takes a lot of patience. So let me show you maybe a little bit better here. So here's your back piece in blue. You have your cut information. You always want to label patterns. In the industry, they have to have their patterns labeled. So say for example, you want to start like a clothing line or something like that. You have to have all this information labeled for like the manufacturers. You got to send them specs, measurements and everything. So you want to make sure you give them as much information as possible. Otherwise they can't design the clothing for you, or they don't know how to cut it. They don't know how many of them to cut it, and they don't know what size. So this is your t-shirt back. You want to cut it on a fold, and this symbol here means cut on a fold. And you want to let them know what size it is. It's a small. So here's your front. Label it in green. You want to label how to cut it. You want to cut this on the fold also. You want to use this symbol here for cut on the fold. What piece it is a t-shirt, is the front. And what size it is, it's small. And like I said, you can add these pieces down here separately as your ribbing. So you have your neckline ribbing. This is for the front piece. And I put ribbing in green because ribbing means that the green means highlight, and the green means that it's going to be a different material. This material is always going to be different from the material that you cut on the fabric. The ribbing is a lot more stretchier. So you want to label that ribbing so you know that you got to cut it in a different material. You want to label the size. And also you want to put your grain line on how to cut it straight. And you want to cut this on the fold as well. I don't know if you can see that little arrow that I made to cut on the fold. It's similar to these ones. So here's your ribbing piece for your back neck. So you want to label that. Neck, back. This is ribbing also, size small. Your grain line, and how to cut it. And this one here is for the hem, the bottom of your t-shirt. T-shirt hem. Put your grain line so you can cut it straight. Ribbing, you're going to cut it out in a different material. The size is, you want to put that information on there. And you want someone to know how many to cut. You want to cut this on a fold. You want to cut 4 of them. And you want to put the cut symbol. And last but not least, you want to do the same thing for the sleeve. The sleeve has a ribbing also. Some sleeves come with the ribbing. So you want to put the grain line there to cut it straight. The t-shirt, sleeve ribbing, and green. The size, how you want to cut it on the fold. So you want to have all that information on there. And I'm going to show you what I mean by the ribbing. When I mention ribbing, I know I mentioned that a lot. So let me show you what I mean by the ribbing. Some t-shirts usually come with this material, this extra material in here. This is called your ribbing. That's a separate piece from your t-shirt. They have it in the neckline, and they also have it on the sleeves. And they also, sometimes they put it on the hem here. But this one doesn't have it on the hem. But some t-shirts will come with it on the hem. So that's what I mean by ribbing. These will be separate pieces. And they are cut out on different color materials and different fabrics because they stretch a little bit more. So hope you understand that now. All right guys, so last but not least, as I was mentioning, I'm going to show you how to add the seam allowance to these patterns. And what I mean by the seam allowance is the amount of, it's the extra material that you add to your pattern pieces for when you get ready to sew the pieces together. So I'll show you now. So here's our pattern. Hope you can see this. We'll start with our back. So here's our back pattern. So seam allowance. So what we need for our seam allowance simply is going to take our ruler, our 18-inch ruler, and our pencil, preferably a mechanical pencil because it has a more fine, precise line. So this here, this line here, the one where we're going to cut on the fold, that's our center back. our center back, we don't have to add seam allowance because it's not being sewn to anything. It's just gonna be cut on the fold. So everywhere else, we're gonna add seam allowance. So here at our neck, so for this one, we're not going to add the ribbing. We're just gonna keep it included in here. So in this video, we're not gonna work with the ribbing pieces right now. I'll show you that in a later video. I'm gonna make this a little more easier for you. So whatever pieces I have dashed out, I'll just include that as my t-shirt pattern. So we add our seam allowance. We pretty much want to measure, start at the edge of the line. I'll do it right now and then I'll show you. So we're going to add a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is a pretty small seam allowance. It's not too big. Usually at the necks and the sleeves, at the neckline and the armhole, you want to add a small seam allowance. You don't need nothing too big. So this is a 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, and 1/4 inch. Okay, so that's our 1/4 inch seam allowance for our neck. And as you're adding your seam allowance, I would suggest that you make a note of how much it is. So this is a 1/4 inch. Make it easier for you and also keeps you organized. You can also go by the seam allowance that you feel is in the t-shirt as well. So whatever seam allowance they used, you can also go by that also. If you're not sure how much you want to use. That can be tricky. If you're not sure how much you want to use, usually a seam allowance, the standard for seam allowance is 5/8, which is pretty big. So usually we use 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4, 5/8 is like the largest. So when you're working with small areas where you don't want the seam allowance to be really thick, you want to use a 1/4 inch or maybe like a 3/8 of an inch. Also depending on the fabric also. If there's really a thick fabric, you want to usually use a small seam allowance. Just so you can keep the bulkiness of the fabric really loose or thin. So like I said, you can go by the seam allowance of the t-shirt. All this is overlocked also. So they did about, you can measure that. So this is seam allowance here. This is what I mean by seam allowance. It's the material that's, it's the pieces of the patterns that's sewn together with that extra material on the edge. That's seam allowance. And where the stitching is. It's the stitching between, or it's the stitching here plus the material that's sticking out. This right here is called your seam allowance. But this is overlocked together. It's not really sewn together, it's overlocked. So this is about a 1/4 inch that they used. You can just measure it. So about 1/4 inch. So we're going to use a 1/4 inch also. So that was for our shoulder, right? Yeah, that was for the shoulder, or the armhole. For the shoulder it was, okay, so for the shoulder we'll use, about a 3/8, which is a little bit bigger than the 1/4 inch. So we'll just measure that. And we just go up. Okay, so that's 3/8. Measure. Keep track of all your measurements so you're not confused later on. It can be easy to get sidetracked with. So now we're gonna do our armhole, 1/4 inch. Actually, I'll do 3/8 for the armhole. Just want to continue to go around like so. Trust me, this takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of patience, but once you understand the basics of clothing and how to pattern it, it's very simple. You catch on pretty fast. You just have to have the patience for it. It's not an easy task, but it can be fun and quite satisfying at the same time. When you know you can create your own clothing and do things with your own creativity, because we're all fashion connoisseurs in some shape or form. So this is 3/8. And then our side seam, we'll add 3/8. So we got 1/8 and then 3/8. 1/8 and then 3/8. 1/8 and then 3/8. Okay, so that's our 3/8, and then this is our hem. So the hem we can just maybe add, because we're not going to use the add about a 1/2 inch for the hem. Doesn't have to be big. This is 3/8. All right, so there we have it. So we have our here we have our measurements for our seam allowance for our back t-shirts. We have our neckline seam allowance, this here, which is a 1/4 inch. We have our shoulder seam allowance, which is 3/8. We have our armhole seam allowance, another 3/8. We have our side seam allowance, 3/8. And then we have our hem seam allowance, which is a 1/2 inch. A 1/2 inch. We're not going to use these driven pieces. I'll maybe just say that for a later video. Just want to keep it simplified. So this pretty much, this material here, we're going to add that into the length of the shirt. So this right here will actually be right here, but we're not going to use this. So this is going to be included in here. So we added an extra seam allowance. So we only added a 1/2 inch. And this here is the back of the shirt. It's going to get cut on the fold, so we don't have to add seam allowance to that. Whenever you have a cut on the fold, you don't have to add seam allowance. So there it is. I'll show you how to do the front. Pretty much the same. Same technique for the front. So the front, we'll add our seam allowance for the neck, 1/4 inch. Then we're going to include the ribbing piece. So most of the time when you don't have the ribbing and you add a seam allowance to the edge of the material, you might have to have what they call a facing. So although I may not have the ribbing, I might have to add another piece for my facing, for my neckline and for my armholes. Or I may just have to turn them in and just stitch them. But I'll show you what I mean in the next videos. So we're gonna add a 1/4 inch for our neck. Let's go 1/4 inch. Let's go all the way around. So that's our 1/4 inch. So I'm gonna mark that. So that's our neck, and then for our shoulder, we're gonna add the 3/8 for the front as well, just like the back. Usually the measurements are gonna be the same for the front and the back. So we got our 3/8. And we're gonna add our 3/8 for our armhole as well. So we 1/8 and 3/8. Just go all the way around. Measure 3/8 with your ruler. Make sure you have a really good ruler that you can see the measurements with clearly, because you know there's a lot of crappy rulers out there. Hard to get the exact measurement if you don't have the right ruler. You also want something that has the inches metric or units on it, because I noticed a lot of different rulers come with different, even though it says inches, but they always measure differently depending on what you use. If you use like a measuring tape, you might get compared to like a regular, like a fat, like this type of measuring tape compared to like a construction measuring tape. Usually be off by a couple, like a 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch in measurement. So it's very important that you get the right materials. Okay, so our side seam is also 3/8. Measure that, 3/8. And our hem, we'll add also add a 1/2 inch for the hem, just like the back. And we're not going to use the ribbing piece. We're not going to use these ribbing pieces. Alright, so there you have it. Once again, you have your seam allowance for your front. For your hem, you have the 1/2 inch. For the side seam, you have the 3/8. For the armhole, you also have 3/8. Keep note of all your measurements. For the shoulder seam, you have 3/8. And then for your neckline, you have a 1/4 inch. And the back, the center front, you're going to cut this on a fold. So there's no seam allowance to be added to that one. Okay guys, so now I showed you how to add your seam allowances to your patterns. So after that, in the next video, before we get to cutting, I'll show you how to draft your sleeve pattern based on the measurements that we received. And then after that, I'll show you how to cut everything out. So please stay tuned. If you have any questions or not sure of anything or need better clarity, please leave a comment in the comment section below. Like the channel. Also, subscribe for more upcoming content. Thank you so much, guys. Take care.